Hello, sophomores. It is great to see you. Unfortunately, I can't be in class today. Right now, I am actually in Chicago at a conference. So, wait a minute. How can I be here if I'm there? I'm in two places at the same time. Pretty cool. Anyway, thanks to Mr. Sullivan for subbing for the class. Today we are going to continue our lecture, and you will be taking notes. When I come back on Thursday, I'm going to be giving you the study guide or the test ticket. And most likely, this test is going to be on Friday. So make sure you're taking notes today. We'll review the test ticket tomorrow, and then our test most likely will be Friday, possibly Monday, but most likely it will be Friday. First thing I'm going to want you to do is pay attention right now, and I'm going to go to the web page and show you where you can find all of these videos and links that have now been posted. Many of you at conferences saw them already. So take a look here. Here we got the web page. We have early history storytelling in Africa. Got the PowerPoint right there. We got the Guns, Germs, and Steel video about the hunter-gatherer societies. We also have here the video from Cosmos about the wolves evolving into dogs. Chart of the Bantu migrations. The Griot video, which you're going to watch today. Make sure you take notes on that. Oh wait, I'm sorry, that's the one for the Do Now. This is the Do Now video. We'll see that one too. Here we have a talk from a Griot that you'll be watching in class. And down here we have 3 lectures, part 1, 2, and 3, where I put all of our lectures from class here. And the one for today is listed right here, which you'll be able to click on. So, if you miss anything, if I talk too fast today, you don't get everything down, you may go and watch these again. And it'll work on your smartphone, tablet, computer, everything. But now, let's get to the lecture. So let's talk about, write the title on top there, of course, Outsiders versus Western African Oral Tradition. So the first thing I want to tell you is that for Africans, it has not been, especially West Africans, it has not been traditional for them to write down their history, as to read history in books as much. Most of the history was passed on orally, word of mouth. Here we see a woman in this picture here telling a story, with a historical story, giving the history to the people around her. So word of mouth would have been more of a way to give history. And as we'll learn when we get to griots in the next slides, much of this was accompanied by music. Now, that is different than how outsiders have portrayed African history. Written history was not written down by the Africans at first. One of the first people to write down a history of West Africa that we have is a person by the name of Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta wrote the history of Africa down. He wrote in Arabic. He was actually from North Africa, a country today called Morocco, and he came to West Africa, and he was actually pretty impressed with Africa. 5th and 8th period, you know that already because you guys have already done the reading on that. That would be this reading right here. We went through it. 1st period, don't stress about this. We are going to do this tomorrow when we get back. So this is an assignment we will do when we get back. 5th and 8th period, you know a little bit about this already, and that's cool. So let's move on. So what's really important to know is that Ibn Battuta wrote the history down. He wrote in Arabic, but this was not the traditional way that Africans had told their story. For them, it was an oral tradition. Now, you might be thinking that, wait a minute, but oral tradition, saying it out loud, you could make mistakes, you could forget things. It might be better to write it down. That might be more correct, more factual. Well, oral tradition, first off, is very common in many societies. American Indians have often used oral tradition along with Africans. Also, you guys read the Odyssey this year, and the Odyssey was not written down for hundreds of years. Homer originally recited the whole Odyssey, did it by word of mouth, and memorized it, and then it passed down to other people. That is a very common way of passing history and can be effective. So let's look at the second group of people who wrote history down, and those would be the Europeans. Europeans wrote history of Africa, but they came in, again, as outsiders and did not know that much about Africa. They didn't know the people there, and they weren't really in the mood to ask, because when they came in, especially in the 1800s, they were coming in to conquer and to take over. So when they came in with racist attitudes, and they saw Africans as being inferior. And it shows up in a lot of their history, as the Europeans were taking away land and taking away resources from the Africans. Now we could still see traces and evidence of this, and again, this was from our reading that we did. And again, first period, don't worry, tomorrow you're going to do these readings. A reading that we got from 1898. And that was from this book here, Cities and People of the World. We read about this one. This is the one where I showed you. We had the picture of, there's Professor Glee and his students who are coming in. And it talks about Africa and extremely racist, talking about Africans as being half children, half animal, heathen, and just using horrible words. It would be hard to write a history that would be more racist than that. And we read that document 5th and 8th. First period, you well read it. But that is an example of showing the outsiders who came in. Yes, they were writing, but I would say the Africans' history themselves was much more correct, much more factual than what the outsiders were writing. A problem is, whenever outsiders write a history, they come in with their own point of view and their own bias. So on these readings, especially the ones from the Europeans, we see European bias. We see a lot of racism in these writings, where the African storytellers, they're telling their story, and they know a lot more about their own culture, which I would say is actually probably a better history to get than the readings that we got. So there were storytellers, and they would tell these epics that could last for days about past kings, about important events that happened in the community. So this is the West African oral tradition, which is much different than the outsiders were giving. Going back to Ibn Battuta real quick, we kind of saw that he didn't know everything that was going on in West Africa, but at least he was neutral, and it seemed like he wanted to learn more about what was going on, and in addition to being very impressed with the Sultan or the king. Let's move ahead. All right, let's talk griots. So what is a griot? The simplest way to define a griot would be someone who is both a historian and a musician. We can see here in this picture, we have a griot, we have a performer, a woman here, and a man playing the kora, K-O-R-A, which is an African stringed instrument. Possibly, it looks very much like an early ancestor of the guitar or banjo. So this would be a griot, and what griots are is they're historians and musicians. In West African culture, both historically and today, each tribal clan or each cultural group of people, they had their own griot. And this is a clan member, again, who was a historian and a musician, and would pass the stories of the history down from generation to generation. So pass it down from son to son if it's a griot. For a female, which would be called a griotee, from mother to daughter. Griots were trusted court advisors to the kings of West Africa from the 12th century all the way to the 20th century. So that'd be like 1100s to 1900s. Every king wanted a griot to recite the history of the kingdom and pass it down. So again, the history wasn't written down, everything was memorized, and it was sung. So you'd get the whole history of the kingdom, and you'd get it through the griot. Let's move ahead. Nope, not there, not there, not there. There we go. All right, so what are the jobs and duties of a griot? I said duties. That means poop. Anyway, so what are the jobs and duties of a griot? The griot memorized the clan's significant events such as births, deaths, marriages, hunts, wars, basically ensuring and guaranteeing the survival of the culture, that it would be passed on. It was said that if you want to buy some clothes, go to the weaver. If you want to buy a garden hoe, an axe, or a knife, you go to the blacksmith and he'll make it. But if you want the history of the people, you have to go to the griot. Again, they were accompanied by a kora, K-O-R-A would be the instrument, drumming, hand clapping of the villagers. Griots would speak for hours, days. Often they would speak and there would be what's called call and response, where the griot would say something and the crowd would repeat back. So, this would be a memorized history and it was passed down generation to generation. Right now, we're going to pause this right here, so go ahead and pause it. And why don't you watch the short clip of a griot saying what he does. Also, the quote you're going to see in this video, which I think is an amazing quote, is that when a griot dies, it's like a library has burned to the ground. So go ahead and watch that. All right, for studying griots, we see there's a man here, a professor, who's studying the griots. Actually, I would say this picture right here is a pretty cool picture because we see the African guy who's a griot, and you see the white dude there. He is a professor, Thomas A. Hale. I would actually make an argument these are two professors talking to each other. So the griot is explaining the history, and the guy from actually Penn State University, Thomas A. Hale, he is writing and collecting the information. Thomas A. Hale, who studied griots, has said that the job description would be for a griot they're a historian, an advisor, spokesperson, diplomat, an interpreter and translator, a musician, a composer, a teacher, a warrior, a witness, and a praise singer. Thomas A. Hale is quoted as saying that griots became so valued that they were not allowed to leave the chief's side, especially during discussions, trials, or deliberations. So there's a war going on, for example. The king would be like, Griot, you ain't going anywhere. I need you here. I need to know what's happened in the past so we can make our decisions. You know, studying past battles. What did old kings do? What did people do when there was a struggle going on? So the griot would be there to advise the king. So they weren't just like memorizing history. They would also give opinions on what should be done. So they were a very trusted advisor. So what does it take to be a griot or a griotee? Again, it's an inherited position. You get it from passed on from mother or father. You have to have an amazing memory to be able to do this and use memory skills, and you have to have musical talent. You got to be one part professor, one part musician. So it's kind of like you're being a mix of, let's say you got to be like half Yale professor and like half Drake is pretty much what you kind of got to be, or Alicia Keys or J. Cole or somebody. That's kind of what you have to be. It's like you have to be a history professor and a musician on top of it. All right, so male, griot, female, griotee. And griotees are also found to be very important, especially doing events like weddings and others throughout history. So there are both male and female griots. Male, female. Male is a griot, and a female would be a griotee. Okay, now we are in West Africa, and what we are looking here is musicians who are playing with a griot. So if you are to experience what it would be like to see a griot and hear the story, this is kind of like what it is. He's playing a kora, singing a song that would tell you the history. I would infer the man in purple here would be the main griot, who's telling his story. The others are playing music. And there would be some call and response with a chorus that would be said, like here, again and again. And the chorus isn't quite coming up yet. There it is.